Let me take you on a journey to a beachy island known as Sin City of the South, the playground for the adults, but where there is sin, there are the women who thrived within it, and how without them, this little town wouldn't be what it is today.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I'm gonna turn back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to find me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, want you to shade the drive.
Hello, my name is Summer, and this is Paying For It. Thank you for being here for episode 13. Today, I am starting my series on the playground of the South and all the line had to offer. However, before we get there, if you haven't already, I highly recommend you check out the video versions where you can see history come to life. This is the perfect series to jump onto that because I was just recently there, and I will be adding some of my own pictures and videos of what the line had to offer and some of the houses that are still standing today. Today's episode is mostly all the information I've got it from Galveston's Red Light District, A History of the Line by Kimber Fountain. She is a Galveston local who has her history degree, and she has written a couple books. This is one of her first books that she wrote, and it is packed full with information. So if you are interested after this episode, I highly recommend you looking up her book. It's short, but like I said, packed full of information on Galveston and just the history of Galveston. And so, yeah, I would highly suggest, if you like what I have to say today and you're still curious and want more information, check out her book. It's offered on Amazon, and yeah, and not sponsored or anything, but I really liked it, and that is where, I'm getting a lot of my information for this series. I picked it up on my birthday down at a really cute local bookstore there. So yeah, I suggest getting the actual physical copy. It is offered on Kindle, but there's really unique pictures that Kimber was able to include in this book that, I think it would, I think pictures bring everything together. So I definitely suggest, if you're into that sort of thing, check it out. But, as for that, I don't really have an intro topic today. I do want to say, last episode, I told you I got back from my birthday trip from Galveston, and we brought back a kitten. You cannot see him, but or maybe you can if you're watching the video version, but there he is, the little demon Travis, and he is just living his best life, doing his thing. Him and his brother are slowly coming together. Hopefully his sister is like, you stay on your side, I'll stay on my side, but eventually I'm sure they will hopefully become friends. But yeah, so like I said, no real intro topic. This might be a bit of a longer one. So yeah, hopefully we can get through it all today. It took me a very long time to write and research. Well, not really research, but a very long time to write. I am really trying to put it all into my script so that my personality shines through, but also the information you're getting is being presented in an accurate, fun way. So yes. But with that being said, you know what time it is. Grab yourself a cocktail, a mocktail, a coffee, whatever you fancy. Today, I actually have a drink today. I have a spicy pineapple margarita. I use Ghost Tequila today, so it is like a spicy tequila with a tahini rim. And yeah, let's get into this. I hope you enjoy this episode. I know I have. So cheers. Delicious. Delicious. Welcome to Galveston, the playgrounds of the South, where today, if you step onto the island, it's filled with family-friendly, beachy vibes and a lot of seafood restaurants. But I knew he was going to jump up here because there's too many chords not to. But we aren't here to talk about what Galveston is today or what it will be in the future. No way, baby. We are here to step into the past of the beautiful beachy town that was known to all those who traveled to it as the Sin City of the South. Where there is sin, well, you know, there are the ladies who thrived within it. And that is why we are talking about the beachy town today. Because let me tell you how sinful this city truly was back in the day. Galveston has a wild past. Anywhere that has a nickname as a Sin City, well, you can assume it has a colorful past. However, not all of it is about vice, though. Galveston is a coastal town that is riddled with historical buildings, all with a story to tell. Some that have been survivors of this devastating 1900s hurricane, some hotels that hosted the most affluent and influential of the past, those that were hosted by the Marcio brothers. Oh, and if you're into ghosts, Galveston has a very spooky ghost story to tell as well. But when you walk down the post office street, you can almost feel the sensual naughtiness from the past. Welcome to the Line, Galveston's red light district that thrived out in the open for over 70 years. To understand how and why the Line thrived, we have to go back to the beginning, to Galveston's beginning. History tells us that the first signs of prostitution popped up at the wares and port facilities, which were located on Water Street. That is now currently known as Avenue A/Harborside Drive. This is because this was where the little town of Galveston kind of began. It was where all the comings and goings were to be had. So of course it was only natural that the working girls would end up establishing themselves around the saloons near Water Street. 5 blocks away on Post Office Street, Avenue E was getting its own little boom in the housing development, as its wealthy cotton planters were building their swanky homes. However, when war broke out between states, the cute little beachy town quickly became a military outpost due to the fact that it was the closest port to Mexico, which was an ally to the Union. The island became a crucial post to supply military men with supplies and lifelines throughout the battle. Because of this, though, it also put a huge target on Galveston. panicking a lot of the islanders, which caused a lot of them to sell their homes and flee. While many of the people were rushing to get the fuck off the island, one group was rushing to move in because of the fact that it was a port city and now a military outpost. Working women were flocking to the island because, as we are learning, where there are a mass amount of men and or military being shipped, our working girls know what that meant. Money, honey. These extravagant houses left vacant by the townspeople were now on the market cheap, and they were perfect for the ladies coming in to capitalize on all the bored military men who happened to be very cash rich. These ladies unknowingly started the trend that will last in Galveston for decades to come. The only real lasting impact of the wartime on the island was the start to the red light district, or better known to Galveston as the Line. It also was the start to a long-standing semi-acceptance from the townspeople. Or in this time period after the war, the townspeople really were just in kind of denial about what was really happening down on the line. They would go as far as bullying the news journalist if or when a scandalous story of important governmental people were seen and reported on. Like, for example, when a reporter published an article in the Flakes Daily Bulletin titled "A Night with a Demi-Mode" in 1866, he claimed that several high-profile leaders of the city and churches were seen being entertained at Miss Vic Montagn's house. The scandal. However, when the article was run, the townspeople didn't react the way this journalist was expecting. They weren't scandalized by their church leaders who preached on the sin of it on Sunday mornings, but being part of those being entertained by what was offered on the line. No. They chose to attack the reporter who wrote the article, going as far as accusing him of copywriting a burlesque play. Now, during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War, there was a small attempt at reform for the islands. In fact, at one point, a group of evangelicals made a visit to a top madam of the era, Cora Morris, who was graciously hosting the ladies at her house of Il Repertoire while they attempted to pray for her and try to get her to repent and turn her life around. The church ladies, thinking they were doing the work of God, that was until one of Cora's regulars bounded into the house calling out, "Hey Cora, where's my baby Helen?" Rounding the corner to the parlor and the group of church ladies, the room was stunned. He looked into the group of familiar women, only too late realizing this was his wife's church group, and at that moment he saw his wife crumpled to the ground, fainting at the devastation of seeing her husband in the house. But not only that, him being so damn comfortable at home within the house. After that, the so-called respectable women of Galveston decided the best way to deal with the ladies of night was to pretend that it wasn't happening and ignore it, causing the short attempt to reform to fade away to history. However, while the islanders and vacationers were enjoying the playground of the South, another group was gearing up to try their damnedest to clean up the city. We have talked about them before. That's right, reformers, most that weren't even islanders, because remember, at this time, Galveston was still in the mindset of be and let be. They weren't really seeing the need to reform. They enjoyed what all Galveston Galveston had to offer and what was being offered, what was being brought to them because of what was being offered. Reform movements for Galveston never really generated any real support from those living on the island. But for those reformers that felt they had to do something because they were working for God, it wasn't until around World War I when Galveston's Ministerial Association would start its 40-year battle against prostitution. And it is in 1917 that they would take the first step to aligning themselves and their cause with the federal government in the form of sending a telegram to the Secretary of War with their unofficial survey outlining their thoughts on the situation of vice on the islands. Their telegram read, "The Galveston Ministerial Association and patriotic citizens demand protection of the uniform and flag from the thousands of prostitutes within miles and several saloons within half a mile of 3 companies of soldiers who buy liquor from bootleggers. The city is flooded with outcasts from other cities." Their statement, however, wasn't quite true in one part, though, was it? Because Galveston's patriotic citizens weren't quite fond of being told what to do and would get quite irritated when denied the right to determine their form of fun. They were quite okay with the separation and our districts of vice. They didn't mind them. The minstrel was smart, right? They saw the writing on the wall when it came to the city's outlook on what they considered the morally sick. So they knew in order to put pressure on the city and the city officials, they needed to take bigger measures. The city commissioners were hoping that attempting to contain the vice dolls to the districts would be enough to pacify the federal government. However, the federal government had concerns for the growing number of men in the army who were getting tested and popping positive for syphilis. Because the government needed as many boots on the ground they could get for World War I, they also didn't have the money to keep covering the expensive treatment for the soldiers. The U.S. government was not about to keep paying for it, if you get what I mean. So it was this that had the city officials of Galveston calling for the closure of the districts, or the district. However, let me remind you that it was widely accepted within the military what the soldiers were doing, as long as it didn't affect the public image of the army, and the call for the shutdown was always related to the costliness of the treatment they had to pay for the men within the military, and never actually about the practice itself. In reality, it was almost like a punishment for the men of the military for not being able to keep their dicks clean. Need I remind you again that no actual evidence supports that the women of vice were the true cause to the STIs epidemic of military men. We can thank the lack of sexual education the soldiers weren't getting for that. The shutdown was all for show anyways. Although the federal government had demanded the shutdown of the vice district and it looked as if they had cleared out the vice from the city, most just went about their business. No real enforcement to be seen. So although houses had for rent sale signs on them, they were still operating within, and the back door was always open. All this really did was allow vice to scatter around the city, and most ended up on the beach where tourists and military men spent their time. So really all this did was allow vice dolls not to be contained in the one district, but to apply their trade within the entire city. It is no surprise that between the fact that the extracurricular activities of the soldiers were widely known and accepted internally, as long as they didn't have to pay for it, of course, nor it affect their public image. plus the lack of real enforcement, that once the war ended, the federal government quickly withdrew their support for the ministerial association. They, however, weren't going to stop attempting reform, so the association turned again to the city commissions in pleas for help. However, they were widely ignored, at last allowing the district to open back up and thrive once again. One change that did come from a group of citizens to help with the spread of diseases was to implement a system that made it mandatory for the ladies to get health certificates and health inspections. That doesn't last long, because less than a year into the program, it turns out that a lot of the police officers in charge of the inspections were taking bribes for health certificates, and the program was pretty damn corrupt. In order to take care of that, they chose not to seek out changes, instead just chose to shut the program down, and off Vice went, continuing as normal. So while the rest of the world was struggling with the aftermath of the war and the Depression, Galveston was living a little paradise off on their own, not only due to the beautiful beach island that it was, but its paradise for the naughty. It had almost 500 saloons and as many as 55 brothels. That, added to the fact of the town's ability to turn a blind eye, allowed for it to be a playground away from the solemn world happening around them. Up until Prohibition, the island's only real illegal activity was prostitution. That was all going to change, though, when Prohibition was rolled out. Galveston ends up getting introduced to the Marcio brothers, who are going to really allow Galveston to live up to its nickname of the Sin City of the South. So, who are the Marcio brothers, and why are they important to the ladies working the line? Sam and Rosario Marcio were an influential crime family who ran Galveston from 1920s to around 1950. Their success started when they opened their first club on the island in the 1920s. This club offered bootleg liquor, fine dining, first-class entertainment. Although the Marcio brothers were technically going outside the law to make money, the townspeople were more than willing to turn a blind eye to their illegal activities. This is due to a few things. Rosario, known as Rose, was the enforcer for the family, but he also became the locals' informal police force. Rose and his group would regularly patrol the island streets, especially at night, providing better and less corrupt protection than the actual police force. It is reported that he and his group of men actively led to some of the island's lowest rate of crime. He was an overall feared but respected man in the community. Then there was his brother Sam, who was the frontman of the family's image, as he was often featured in various newspapers and magazines. He was an active philanthropist who went out of his way to take care of people in need. He also believed wholeheartedly in advertising and marketing Galveston as the perfect vacation destiny. He spent a lot of time and money boasting about Galveston and all the fun it had to offer, including the ladies down on the line. The Marcio brothers were smart and saw it as something that was always going to be sought after. So they went out of their way to make sure to protect the ladies working within the district. Knowing with them, paired with the easily attained liquor that was being bootlegged by them, they could really make some money together. They also played a key role in keeping the ladies supplied with lots of clientele due to the fact that the crime family was marketing Galveston as the playground of of your dreams, a place to leave the troubles of the world behind. It makes sense that the townspeople really turned a blind eye to them and all the illegal activities they were truly doing, because as the world was suffering around them, Galveston was living it up with all the money that the tourists were bringing into the city. So no matter how much they may have seen some of the activity as morally wrong, they were willing to look the other way because they weren't willing to give up the benefits it offered to them in the long run. Although the Marcio brothers were in town and running Galveston's underworld, that didn't mean that the reformers were going to give up their call to action. So in 1921, another more serious attempt by the mayor W.A. Keenan to eradicate prostitution from the city was made. He attempted to create a citizen-run group to help in his cause. However, all 25 citizens he called upon declined to serve, thus making his attempt fizzle out before it even really began. A year later, another protest was made by the Ministerial Association in attempts to bring reform to the city. That didn't do much either, as the city commissioners who said that they were not going to be able to eliminate prostitution. They would do what they could to minimize it, which is code for they weren't going to do anything. The city and the city governors all were in pretty much agreement on the outlook of vice dolls on the island, which was that removing prostitution was going to be impossible. And the best course of action was to control and maintain it. Hence, why they had Post Office Street, the red light district. It was also widely thought that if the district was kept, it would cut down on police corruption, like allowing the madams to pay them off for raids or arrest. Although that's not really the case, officers still regularly took money from madams for protection. With the Marcio brothers actively paying for the marketing of Galveston as a resort-style town, the city goers also had a lax look on the going-ons with vice. The election of Mayor J.E. Pierce was the city's way of solidifying that they were okay with the outlook the island had on vice, because as Keenan was for reform, Pierce was totally okay with the current outlook on vice and those running it. Though Pierce often stated that the issue of vice has never been a problem and that the townspeople were more than happy with the way things were going. He was correct with that statement because, as history shows us, the 15 years prior to him being elected, not one news article or government statement was made about vice. Most islanders were more concerned about the wares and port, which was directly tied to a very public ongoing feud with 3 elite Galveston families. This allowed for prostitution to go pretty much undisturbed for the next 2 decades. In 1927, another educated survey showed that the district was going strong, still with 1,000 plus vice dolls, 54 houses, and another dozen that couldn't be confirmed as houses, but surveys were pretty sure were definitely Browdy houses. And I don't know why, even Kimber states in the book, it's unclear on why they couldn't be determined for sure. But yeah, they were well rumored to be houses. Did this affect the island? Not in the slightest. In fact, it definitely drew in more of the crowd, as Galveston was already gaining in popularity for its good time, and the ladies were just a big old cherry on top. On top of that, Galveston at the time was still the second largest export city. The port could have up to 30 ships at any given time. So when the world got hit and most cities were suffering from the Great Depression that started in 1929, the island was able to breeze by due to the Galveston being a major port city for the world, plus the Galveston's underworld providing gambling, booze, and love by the hour, kept the city and islanders pretty damn sheltered from the devastation of the Depression. On Post Office Street around the 1930s, though, it saw its influx of women coming into town in an attempt to escape the effects of the Depression. This is when the district sees its first slight decline as the competition increases, as well as the houses of Post Office Street were starting to show some signs of aging. Because remember, these are houses from like the 1800s. It's now 1930s. And not a lot of the women on the work in the line really gave a fuck about the historical purposes of these houses. So the houses are starting to show some decline. There's a lot of women coming in to get to their money. And so, yeah, with increased number of women coming through and cheaper prices being offered, coupled with the houses showing their age, the district was losing the glamour of its past. On top of that, as far as all the vice that was happening within the city, including bootlegging, booze, alcohol, gambling, because they were all in the hands of the Marcille brothers, who were very powerful and too powerful to kind of fuck with, the district would always be the biggest target for the police to show they are doing something. And so they were always going to be the biggest target for raids and arrests because they were the easiest target. And, you know, they were a woman, so it was always going to be them. The district, though, would get another break at the start of the World War II due to new opportunities for women in the work field, allowing a lot of women working the line for survival or for those who are ready for a change to be able to leave the line and start something new, giving the ladies on the line a bit of a relief from the oversaturation of the market. On top of that, it was again that Galveston became home to 10,000 military men every month, allowing on one hand for the line to be able to flourish again. However, on the other hand, it once again became the target for the federal government. Once again, the district was officially closed. Just like before, though, it was all for show. No real enforcement of the closure was made. The police did try to make a good show for the people by making regular raids and arrests, and they would print their results of said raids and arrests in the paper, giving the picture of real change being made on the side of reform. So when the war ended, it was no surprise that the reformers wanted to make sure they stayed belligerent and not allow the progress that was made to crumble. Somehow, though, they were blind to the fact that during the 1940s, besides the women working the line, the district employed almost 1,000 people in the city, and it somehow was able to again escape the attempt to shut down. So when World War II ended and the men returned home, the world just expected the women who took to the workforce just to return back to domesticity and being housewives, mothers, and maids. However, a woman had a different idea. They quite liked their freedom that their jobs brought to them. Mass media and even the new TV shows tried to push what the true place of a woman is, and that was at home, providing a nurturing, respectable home for their husbands. And this only got worse as the Cold War began due to the U.S. pushing that this was a Christian country and the ideal nuclear family is all they had to offer. However, that promoted a counter movement that women didn't want to go back to just being housewives. But in Texas, this push to get back to the respectable ladies and housewives worked. For most of the vice cities around Texas did kind of disappear. And Galveston, though, had a fierce independence and a history of not liking being told how to spend their free time. So they accidentally became a symbol of disconnect to the push for this Christianity respectable living. Galveston proves that they wanted to continue on as they see fit by electing Mayor Herbert Cartwright, and those who supported him were mostly upper class of the underworld who wanted the city to be wide open. It also seems the islanders also wanted it because they were aware of the positive impacts that the tolerance had on their economy. So it makes sense that Cartwright goes on to serve from 1947 to 1955. So it was safe to say that the line experienced another boom in the market, as it was not uncommon to see cars lined up and down the street starting in the early evenings and not clearing out until the early mornings. Local politicians would basically brag and show off Post Office Street to the executives, using the power of the pussy to get them to sway their way and move their business headquarters to the island, bringing in a lot of money, again, using the women, of course. The line was going to get its first real hit, though, in 1951 when the crime commissioner of Texas legislator did a full-blown probe into the Galveston underground. Mayor Cartwright and 17 other local politicians were called to Austin to testify. However, they weren't going with their tails tucked between their legs, scared of the Texas law. Instead, when asked by the residing judge what they thought they should do about the vice, the response they got wasn't what they were expecting, stating, regulate prostitution, liquor by the drink, and gambling. Mayor Cartwright would later say, if God couldn't stop prostitution, then why should I try? However, to be fair, the mayor was really trying to use prostitution as a diversion, as the real investigation was on the Marcio brothers and their money hold they did or didn't have on the local government. The American Social Hygiene Association was all too happy to set their sights on Galveston and the vice dolls that worked within the island. Their singular goal was to abolish prostitution and other sexual immoralities defined by the Christian faith under the guise of sexual education and to aid in the stop of spread of the venereal disease. They were well aware of the uphill battle they faced because they knew Galveston's islanders did not want outside forces to come through and try to change what they didn't see needed change. They also considered that the local government was incredibly corrupt, so they realized that they had a battle ahead of them. Their plan was to garner the support from local church groups and, of course, the Ministerial Association in the hopes that with enough evidence and support, they could coordinate with the military to make a demand on the city's commissioners. But for years, the locals ignored the ASHA. Unfortunately, though, they were extremely organized and a high level of determination. I mean, it would be something you could commend had it not been so damn destructive to everybody. Though, to be honest, I don't think they gave a fuck how it may or may not affect Galveston and the islanders as a whole. They had a mission and they were working for God, and they didn't care who they destroyed in the process. Becoming angry with the fact that the government wasn't siding with them nor giving them assistance in their crusade, they decided that they in fact did not need the help or back up from the city lawmakers nor the Texas government. They decided to do it themselves. They spent the first part of 1953 gathering a citizen committee to petition to the state government to obtain injunctions and padlock houses. In order for this to work, though, they had to get 10,000 signatures. Howard Slutz, the ASH regional representative, was afraid that even if he was able to obtain the 10,000 signatures, that he still wouldn't get the outcome he was wanting. So he made a visit to Austin to talk to the Attorney General at the time, Shepard, for his assurance that if his signature campaign was successful, they would follow through. He also wanted the assurance that if his campaign was unsuccessful, he would still have the backing of the Attorney General. On his first visit, he was promised full backing, but then on his second visit, Shepard outright refused to meet with Slutz. He was, of course, angry and confused by all of this. That was until the Texas governor made a speech to the Texas Police Officer Association on how important it was for the state government to stay out of local law enforcement issues. He was pretty smug when he stated that any city should only enforce the rules they cared to enforce. Pretty much saying, if Galveston wants their immoral activity to continue on, Galveston should be able to have their moral activity to continue on. Shepard, though, later did send 2 lawyers to file restraining orders and injunctions on 3 houses within the district. ASHA would run with this and would use it as a scare tactic for several houses in the district, basically stating that if injunctions were brought against them, they would be publicly humiliated and ruined. All 6 houses believed this scare tactic, going on to evict all of their tenants, scattering hundreds of girls into hotels. I'm sure that the ASHA saw this as a huge win, shutting down 6 houses. In their mind, they stopped at the very least 100 women from making their living. However, what it really did was scatter the ladies around the city into hotels, because getting paid for it is their job, and that didn't stop them from working. It just put them in a more dangerous situation. However, to the extreme embarrassment of the association, mere hours after they pulled their scare tactics, the commissioner of the police announced the closure of the district. Though that also didn't really stop the sale of Love by the Hour. It just scattered everyone around the city once again, and it caused it to be extremely dangerous for the ladies who chose this as their career. 1 year after the closure, when the government realized that just because the district was closed, they had not eliminated prostitution, they opened a grand jury investigation, and 1 year after that, the county attorney announced that a prostitution ring had been busted in the form of 3 raids, and 13 arrests were made. However, scattering the vice cells around the city wasn't the only downside to the closure of the line, due to most of the citizens of Galveston still having a very openly tolerant outlook on it, caused for extreme corruption within the police department. Commissioner Johnson and his police department was often getting graft and payoffs from the ladies for protection. At one point in the 1950s, it was highly suspected that Johnson had collected over $40,000 throughout the course of his term. To get away with the fact that he wasn't making any arrests, he stated that he would be happy to make house raids if and when they get pointed out to him, but his salary didn't include having to investigate for them. So when Roy Clough was elected mayor, he stated that his plan was to bring the vice back into the open, because since the closure of the district, it hadn't stopped prostitution. It had just sent it all over the city, maintaining the argument that vice was good for Galveston's economy. But also publicly, he would state that his main focus was the degradation of the city itself ever since the district's closure. So basically, he realized that because the city closed their district, they weren't getting as much tourism, money wasn't coming to the city as much, and yeah, he realized that and he wanted to change that. Privately, he argued that if anyone should profit off the fines and fees of prostitution, it should be the city, not the police commissioner, which, for real. He was not quiet about his feelings of corruption that the police commissioner seemed to be all but flaunting these past few years. Clough's brazen statement definitely garnered him a national sensation for wanting to have a wide open city of sin. The ASHA was panicked, so they did their best to make sure that didn't happen. They released their newest unofficial survey stating that there were 18 bordellos still in operation in the city. Commissioner Johnson, who already publicly chastised Clough because, he didn't want to lose all the money he was pocketing for protection, so he definitely saw Clough as a threat. He decided he'd partner with the district attorney, and together they gave the official order for all 18 houses to close. Clough, knowing what this was for what it was, a fake attempt to save face, he stated he was just tickled pink over the announcement. Clough knew Johnson's insincerity, and unsurprisingly, Johnson's announcement produced little to no results in the long run. So at this point, both the Marcio brothers had passed away and their cousins had taken over the family business. However, they weren't quite as good as the Marcio, so when one of them attacked a reporter and garnered some heat for both the family and Clough's attempt to reopen Vice for the city, Clough knew he wasn't going to let that stop him though, and he moved forward with his most lengthy and stunning statements made at the Chamber of Commerce meeting in September 1955. He blasted Johnson, stating that he was warning houses of raids to undermine the city, but most importantly, continued to stuff his pockets with the money he was getting from those who work within the vice, even stating that he had an encounter with a pimp who had refused to pay the fine because he had already paid Johnson. Clough felt that the district was the best thing for the city, one for the city's economy, but also to keep things honest. He also stated his frustrations with the fact that the army privately knows and doesn't care about how many prostitutes were within the city. In fact, they all enjoyed the ladies that offered their time for a price. However, publicly, they wouldn't allow military bases within the city if they had an active district. Clough was frustrated with the hypocrisy of it all. Clough continued to fight to make prostitution work for the city and not just the commissioner. Due to the fact that he couldn't get the green light on the district, he did his damnedest to make sure that Johnson stopped profiting off of it. Unfortunately, though, that meant that the ladies of Vice were the victims of this all-out war between Clough and Johnson. Clough stepped up raids to twice a day, making a bunch of raids and arrests daily. Clough even acted as a judge on the cases to make sure the fines were getting paid to the city and not Johnson, which probably means at some point, Johnson stopped getting his free payday. At least there's that. All this seemed to end up not mattering, though, with the election of a new Attorney General, Will Wilson, who was known for his uppity moral code, and he was open about his distaste for Galveston. Most of his bad taste was directed towards gambling, but the ASHA saw the ally they now had. They immediately started corresponding with Wilson about the depravity that was in their city and how they hoped to turn Galveston into a family-friendly resort city. Just like that, Wilson was on their side, and it wasn't long before him and his Texas Rangers raged down onto Galveston, kicking in doors, smashing in illegal liquor stashes, bashing the face of gambling machines before loading them up and dumping them into the middle of the harbor because, fuck the environment, right? He also went to every single house that was listed in the ASHA report and served them with official injunctions, all while making sure the press didn't miss a single second of his hearing, actions, and effort to take out all the sinfulness of the Galveston. Off he went, back to his home off the islands, leaving Galveston once again beaten, bruised, and alone. After Wilson had decided what was best for the city and did what he felt was right, he was more than willing to offer his help in growing the town as a family tourist town. At least that's what he said to the public. Did he do anything to help Galveston in the long run other than destroy everything? Not really. Klaus stated in a press conference that he agreed with Wilson when it came to gambling, but he stood his ground about maintaining prostitution because we've had it since the time of Christ. ASHA definitely praised and doted on Wilson for all his hard work on cleaning up the city, but less than 4 months later, it was reported 4 more houses had been reopened on Market Street. Wilson and the ASHA decided to conveniently ignore those numbers in the hopes that it would go away because, election was coming back up. However, by March of 1958, it was reported that prostitution had risen by 50% of its former numbers. On top of that, the gambling numbers had risen higher than they had ever been before the raids. Now, though, it had been moved from the seawall and was only offered to the locals, which was quite an ironic turn of events, as when the Marcio brothers were running the underworld, those opposed to them bringing in gambling would always use the argument on how townspeople didn't want gambling in the city and that they got most of their monies from out-of-towners. Doesn't quite seem the case now, though, does it? The aftermath of the damage the ASHA and Will Wilson caused basically stunted the growth of Galveston. What could have continued to be the playground of the South and continued to advance their economy, instead, the city people had to pay for it because of those who had not been part of their town taking their choices away from them for selfish reasons, never listening to those who lived within the town. Galveston was robbed of their future. They could have continued to grow, benefiting from what people so desperately wanted as the playground in the South. If you go there today, yes, it is a family vacation town, but it's not that. Of course, it's still a tourist town, and it's still somewhere you can go to get on a beachy island, but you can also tell the damage that was caused. They robbed this town that so desperately talked about how they just wanted to be. Just let them be. But of course, you know how the power that be is. Very hypocritical. And they didn't care because selfishly, it didn't matter to them what they were destroying because they didn't have to live through it. Unfortunately, that kind of did stop. That was the last time we see a district really open up in Galveston. But that doesn't mean prostitution isn't still running through the town. In fact, doesn't mean prostitution isn't everywhere around us. And that is the history of the line in Galveston, part 1 of the red light history. I hope you join me again next week when we will be diving into the main houses in Queens that ran the line way back then when it was thriving. But with that, that's all I really have for you today. So if you haven't already, I hope you consider following, liking, and or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot. If you have been vibing with my spicy history takes, check out my video versions that you can get access to by subscribing to Paying for It on Spotify. With that, I hope you have a great rest of your night and weekend, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I'm gonna turn back my